What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken Boston tough guy sits down with one of daytime television's most polarizing hosts? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history, where a simple interview spirals into a verbal battlefield that ends with security being called and a guest being forcibly removed from the studio. This isn't your typical celebrity fluff piece. This is raw, unfiltered television that networks pray never sees the light of day. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe how this escalates. The studio lights were blazing hot as Mark Wahlberg settled into his chair on The View's iconic set. What was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his latest film had already taken an uncomfortable turn during the commercial break, with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. As the cameras rolled back to life, Joy Behar's smile seemed particularly sharp, her eyes gleaming with the kind of anticipation that suggested she had something brewing beneath the surface. "So Mark," Joy began, her voice carrying that distinctive New York edge, "your new movie deals with themes of redemption and second chances that must resonate with you personally, given your, shall we say, colorful past." The other hosts exchanged glances. Sunny Hostin shifted uncomfortably in her seat while Sarah N. tried to maintain her professional smile. Whoopi Goldberg, the show's moderator, seemed to sense something brewing but remained silent, perhaps curious to see where this would lead. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Look, Joy, I've been open about my past. I've talked about it in interviews, written about it in books, and used those experiences to become a better person. That's what redemption is about." "Oh, absolutely," Joy replied, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "But some might say that certain actions, especially those involving violence and hate, they leave permanent scars. Wouldn't you agree that some people, particularly in marginalized communities, might find it difficult to simply forgive and forget because someone's made millions in Hollywood?" The studio fell silent except for the low hum of cameras. Mark leaned forward slightly, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his voice lowered. "What exactly are you trying to say here, Joy? Because it sounds like you've got something specific on your mind." "I'm just saying," Joy continued, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating, "that in today's climate of accountability, some of your past actions might not be so easily dismissed with a simple, 'I've changed' narrative. Don't you think the victims of your youthful indiscretions deserve more than just your financial success as an apology?" The cameras captured every micro-expression as Mark's face began to redden. His hands, resting on his knees, slowly formed into fists. "You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about accountability. You sit here every day, hiding behind this desk, throwing stones at people who have actually lived real lives, made real mistakes, and done the real work to change." Whoopi finally stepped in, sensing the situation spiraling. "Okay, let's maybe." "No, Whoopi," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "She wants to have this conversation. Let's have it. Joy, when's the last time you walked through the neighborhoods I grew up in? When's the last time you dealt with real poverty, real violence, real consequences for your actions?" Joy's smile never faltered, but her voice took on a harder edge. "I don't need to walk through those neighborhoods to understand right from wrong, Mark, and I certainly don't need to commit hate crimes to understand their impact." "Hate crimes?" Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a screech that made everyone on set wince. "Is that what we're calling teenage stupidity now? You want to define me by the worst moments of my youth, while completely ignoring everything I've done since?" The studio audience had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond typical daytime television drama. Security guards positioned around the studio moved slightly closer, their hands instinctively moving toward their radios. Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly reveling in having gotten under his skin. "I'm not defining you by anything, Mark. I'm simply asking if you think success in Hollywood somehow absolves you of accountability to the communities you harmed." "Communities I harmed. Communities I harmed." Mark's voice was now loud enough that audio technicians were frantically adjusting levels. "Lady, you don't know the first thing about the communities I came from or the work I've done to give back. You sit in your ivory tower, making judgments about people you've never met, situations you've never faced." Sarah N. attempted to interject with a lighter topic. "Maybe we could talk about your work with youth programs." "No," Joy cut her off, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. "I think this is exactly the conversation we need to be having. Mark, you've made millions portraying tough guys and heroes on screen, but what kind of hero uses violence to solve problems?" Chat controls. Sonnet 4. Mark's face went from red to deep crimson, his entire body language shifting from defensive to aggressive. "What kind of hero?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "The kind that doesn't pretend to be perfect, Joy." The kind that doesn't sit behind a desk judging everyone else while contributing nothing meaningful to society. Contributing nothing. Joy's own voice began to rise, her carefully maintained television persona starting to crack. I've been in this industry for decades, giving voice to important issues, giving voice. Mark let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the stunned studio. You call what you do giving voice. You tear people down for ratings. You manufacture controversy for clicks. That's not journalism, that's exploitation. Whoopi tried once more to regain control. All right, everyone, let's take it down a notch. No, Whoopi, Joy snapped, her professional mask slipping completely. If Mr. Wahlberg wants to question my contributions to society, then let's talk about contributions. What have you contributed besides teaching young people that violence and hatred are just phases you can grow out of? The other hosts sat frozen, their media training completely inadequate for this level of hostility. Sunny Hostin's mouth hung, slightly open, while Sarah Ann looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Mark stepped closer to the desk, his imposing physical presence now fully apparent. You want to know what I've contributed? I've employed thousands of people. I've donated millions to youth programs. I've used my platform to highlight real issues in real communities. What have you done besides spread negativity and division? I've held people accountable. Joy shot back, standing up to match his energy. I've asked the tough questions that need to be asked. I've refused to let celebrities waltz onto this show and whitewash their past mistakes. Whitewashed. Mark's voice became dangerously low. Lady, you wouldn't last 5 minutes in the world. I grew up in. You wouldn't survive one day dealing with the real problems that create the situations you love to judge from your comfortable distance. Joy's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. Don't you dare lecture me about surviving. Mark, I've been fighting battles in this industry since before you were out of diapers. I've dealt with more powerful men trying to intimidate me than you could possibly imagine. Intimidate you? Mark laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. Trust me, Joy, if I wanted to intimidate you, you'd know it. What I'm doing is calling out your hypocrisy. You claim to care about accountability, but you've never been held accountable for the damage your words do to people. My words. Joy's voice reached a new octave. My words don't put people in hospitals. My words don't terrorize innocent people walking down the street. The tension in the studio was now so thick that several audience members had started looking toward the exits. The show's producers, visible in the wings, were frantically gesturing to each other, clearly trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Mark pointed directly at Joy, his finger stopping just inches from her face. Your words destroy people's reputations. Your words spread hate and division. At least when I made mistakes, I was a stupid kid. You're a grown woman who should know better. How dare you point your finger at me? Joy shouted, slapping his hand away from her face. How dare you come onto my show and threaten me? Threaten you? Mark's voice boomed through the studio. I haven't threatened anybody, but you know what? Maybe it's time someone called you out for what you really are. Whoopi finally stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. That's enough. Both of you need to. What am I, Mark? Joy interrupted, her face now inches from his. What am I really? Mark stared down at her for a long moment, the entire studio holding its breath. When he spoke, his voice was ice cold and perfectly controlled. You're a bitter, angry woman who gets her kicks from tearing other people down. Because you never had the courage to build anything meaningful yourself. You hide behind this show, behind your co-hosts, behind your producers, throwing cheap shots at people who actually took risks and lived real lives. The studio erupted. Joy's mouth fell open in shock, while Whoopi immediately stepped between them. Sarah Ann audibly gasped, and Sunny Hostin started shaking her head rapidly. The audience began murmuring, some people standing up to get a better view of the confrontation. Joy recovered quickly, her media experience kicking in. You want to talk about taking risks? Let's talk about the risks your victims took walking down the street when you were out there committing violent crimes. Let's talk about the risks communities take when society decides to forgive and forget just because someone becomes famous. Stop, Whoopi commanded, but her voice was drowned out by Mark's response. My victims. Mark roared. You don't know anything about my victims or what I've done to make amends. But I know about your victims. Every person you've slandered on this show, every reputation you've destroyed, every family you've hurt with your reckless accusations and character assassinations. Joy stepped around Whoopi, getting as close to Mark as possible. Character assassination. You mean like asking tough questions about someone's documented criminal past? Documented. Mark's laugh was harsh and bitter. You mean the same documentation? That shows I was a minor. The same documentation that shows I served my time. The same documentation that shows decades of charitable work and community service. By now, security guards were moving in closer, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The show's direct. The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Security guards were now positioned directly behind Mark, their hands hovering over their equipment, waiting for the signal to intervene. The studio audience had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Joy's face contorted with rage. "Are you threatening me? Are you actually threatening me on live television? Because if you think for 1 second that I'm going to be intimidated by some washed-up actor with anger management issues washed up." Mark's voice cut through her words like a blade. "At least I'm not a has-been talk show host desperately clinging to relevance by attacking people better than her, better than me," Joy shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You're a convicted criminal. You're a violent thug who got lucky in Hollywood. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you're better than anyone." That was the breaking point. Mark lunged forward, not physically attacking, but moving aggressively toward Joy with such sudden force that the security guards immediately sprang into action. "Convicted criminal. You sanctimonious piece of security," Whoopi shouted at the top of her lungs as 2 large security guards grabbed Mark's arms, restraining him before he could finish his sentence or reach Joy. "Get your hands off me," Mark bellowed, struggling against the guard's grip. His face was now purple with rage, veins bulging in his neck as he fought against their restraint. "I'm not done talking to this." "Yes, you are," Joy screamed back, standing on her chair now to get closer to his eye level despite the security barrier between them. "You're done. You're finished. Get this violent maniac out of my studio." The guards were now actively pulling Mark away from the desk, but he continued to shout over their efforts. "Your studio. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You think you own everything. You think you can say whatever you want without consequences. The only consequences here are for you." Joy fired back, pointing dramatically at Mark as he was being dragged backward. "You just threatened me on live television in front of millions of viewers. Your career is over." Sarah N. had now completely left her seat and was standing against the back wall, while Sunny Hostin was frantically trying to gather her papers and belongings. The studio audience was in complete chaos, some people standing to get a better view, others heading for the exits, and many simply staring in stunned disbelief. Mark continued, fighting against the security guards, his voice echoing through the studio. "My career, lady, I've got more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. I don't need this circus. But someone needs to tell you the truth about what you really are, what I really am." Joy was now leaning over the desk, held back only by Whoopi's firm grip on her arm. "I'm someone who won't be bullied by washed-up actors with anger problems. I'm someone who asks the questions that need to be asked." "You're a parasite," Mark roared as the guards managed to pull him several feet from the desk. "You feed off other people's pain. You destroy lives for ratings. You're everything that's wrong with this industry." The show's director was making frantic cut signals from behind the cameras, but the confrontation had reached such a fever pitch that stopping seemed impossible. The guards were now actively dragging Mark toward the studio exit, but he was still shouting. Joy, now freed from Whoopi's restraining grip, stood on her chair and pointed accusingly at Mark. "Don't you dare lecture me about this industry. I've been fighting for justice and accountability while you were out there terrorizing innocent people." "Justice." Mark's laugh was bitter and harsh as he continued to struggle against the guards. "You wouldn't know justice if it bit you on your. That's enough." One of the security guards finally spoke up, his voice booming with authority. "Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately, or we will call the police." "Call them," Mark shouted back. "Call whoever you want, but make sure you tell them about the harassment and defamation that goes on in this place every single day." Joy was practically foaming at the mouth now. "Harassment? You're the one who came onto my show and started threatening people. You're the one with the history of violence. You're the one who can't control your temper." "Control my temper?" Mark's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. "You've been attacking me from the moment I sat down. You've been trying to destroy my reputation with lies and half-truths, and when someone finally stands up to you, you play the victim." The security guards had now managed to drag Mark almost to the studio exit, but his voice was still carrying clearly through the space. Whoopi had given up trying to moderate and was instead trying to comfort the visibly shaken Sarah N., while Sunny Hostin sat frozen in her chair, staring at the chaos unfolding before her. "Play the victim." Joy's voice reached a new level of hysteria. "I am the victim here. You came onto my show, you threatened me, you tried to intimidate me, and now you're being dragged out by security. If that's not proof of who you really are, I don't know what is. Proof of who I am." Mark managed to break partially free from one guard's grip long enough to turn back toward the desk. "The proof of who I am is 30 years of work, charity, and growth. The proof of who you are is happening right now, for everyone to see." "What's happening right now?" Joy screamed back. "Is that a violent criminal is being removed from my studio after threatening me on live television. That's what's happening." The guards finally managed to get Mark to the studio exit, but before they could push him through, he broke free long enough to shout one final statement that would be replayed countless times on social media and news programs. Joy Behar, you are a miserable, bitter woman who destroys people for a living, and everyone watching this knows it. Everyone sees through your fake concern and your manufactured outrage. You're not a journalist, you're not an advocate, you're just a bully who finally met someone who won't back down. Get him out, Joy shrieked, her voice now completely hoarse from shouting. Get him out of here before I call the police myself. The guards finally succeeded in pushing Mark through the exit, but his voice could still be heard, echoing from the hallway. The truth hurts, doesn't it, Joy? The truth about what you really are. The studio fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of Joy's heavy breathing in the